feels like every decade we pick a new nutrient to demonize, and in the early 2000s those were the fats, and it didn't matter if you got your fats from eggs or avocados or butter. Fats were always the enemy. Right now, especially with the rising popularity of the glucose goddess, this has shifted somewhat towards carbs and sugars specifically, and while I believe that her advice has probably helped a lot of people, especially people with insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, there are also perfectly healthy people that have started wearing glucose monitors because they feel the need to check their blood sugar levels after their normal daily meals. This is the main reason why today we're talking all things sugar. We're going to discuss the fear-mongering around it and if it is actually evidence-based, what types of sugar or carbs, to be more specific, are indeed bad and how bad they are for your health, what is insulin resistance, and what are some science-backed strategies around the consumption of carbohydrates that you can implement to improve your blood sugar levels and stabilize them. By the way, I am not a doctor, I am not a medical professional. This is a huge disclaimer, so if you have type 2 diabetes, you might want to consult with your doctor before going and implementing a very specific strategy. If you are a perfectly healthy person and you enjoy a sweet treat here and there, you should not be worrying about blood sugar spikes at all. You should be able just to enjoy your life without those thoughts, but this is just my opinion. I like to live my life somewhat more stress-free than some other people. Sugar is probably one of the most well investigated nutrients out there. Because of the huge amount of research that has been done on it, it has been established pretty well that excessive consumption of sugar is indeed linked to the development of obesity, diabetes, insulin resistance, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, gout, or even some types of cancers. This is a bit controversial, but we're going to talk about this in a minute. Excessive consumption of sugar is something that our body is not accustomed to handle. Our body cannot store large amounts of sugar, although it is our body's most preferred source of energy. We have the capacity to store some sugar in our muscles in the form of glycogen. The more muscle we have, the more capacity we have for sugar, and we can also store some of it in our liver. Again, it's glycogen. The rest of the excessive sugar, if we've consumed some, is converted into our liver to glycerol, and then it is stored in our fat deposits for later. This is why excessive consumption of sugar also leads to weight gain, and especially fat gain. Research has suggested indeed that fructose-containing sugars could have more negative implications on our health compared to other types of sugars, and fructose-containing sugars, for instance, would be present in high fructose corn syrup. This is very logical. By the way, high fructose corn syrup isn't even legal in the European Union. I know a lot of my viewers are US based, just so that you know. For people that live in the US, high fructose corn syrup is probably present in a lot of the sweetened beverages or the desserts that you get from the supermarket. It has been linked more specifically to the development of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease because of the very specific metabolite that is being created when your gut microbiome converts the fructose, which then can have effects on the storage of lipids in your liver. And I'm talking about fructose containing sugars. I never refer to fructose coming from fruits. Firstly, because fruits have a lot of a complex matrix and also a lot of other nutrients such as fiber and antioxidants and have so many beneficial effects on your health. Secondly, the research also doesn't refer to fruits as the main source of fructose containing sugars. The paper actually put a lot more emphasis onto sugar sweetened beverages such as soft drinks, fizzy drinks that a lot of people consume instead of water on a daily basis, and they are one of the main drivers of this entire sugar problem. On the topic of cancer development, why I said it's controversial, this is because it is not exactly established if the development of certain types of cancers is because of the obesity factor that comes with excessive consumption of sugar over time, or is it exactly because of the high sugar consumption. This is a bit of a gray area, so making such a definite statement is not possible yet. Another bodies of research suggest that sugar could also be linked to inflammation, irrespective again of the overweight and obesity factor. Generally, visceral adiposity, visceral fat gain in the central region of our body is linked to higher levels of inflammation in the body, which logically also exacerbates symptoms of inflammatory diseases. But research now suggests that independent from the obesity factor, excessive sugar consumption could have negative effects also on inflammatory diseases when an individual is not overweight or obese. Now that I've covered all of these topics, let's move into insulin resistance. Insulin is the hormone in our body that helps get the sugar, get the glucose to our cells so they can use it for energy. Insulin is secreted from the cells in our pancreas when we consume carbs, when we consume sugar, so that the sugar that is now released into the bloodstream can be transported to the different tissues in our body. For example, our liver, our muscles, our fat deposits, all of them have receptors for insulin. And insulin then, when our blood sugar levels rise, goes and transports them to these specific receptors and to the tissues and the cells. Insulin resistance is a condition where, for some reason, the receptors on these cells are not as sensitive to insulin as they used to be, and they cannot uptake the glucose. This leads over time to your body producing more and more insulin to compensate for that, and this is why people develop hyperinsulinemia. They have excessive amounts of insulin being released, which would exhaust over time their pancreas and in the end might lead to type 2 diabetes, where the pancreas does not secrete any insulin anymore. Insulin resistance is connected to a lot of other types of conditions, such as polycystic ovarian syndrome. It is also even connected to pregnancy. Women in their third trimester are more likely to be insulin resistant. It is actually very common. It is expected to be an adaptive response of the body because a lot of the resources are being transported to the fetus, and this is also the reason why some pregnant women develop gestational diabetes. Insulin resistance can actually be developed also as a consequence of excessive fat consumption, because if you consume way too much fat and more strongly correlated saturated fat that is present in, let's say, more solid fat sources such as butter, for example, all of this leads to, of course, higher accumulation of fats and triglycerides and a downregulation of the receptors that are sensitive to insulin, so they become less sensitive to insulin, which then results in insulin resistance. On the topic of carbohydrate consumption, the research paper gave a lot more nuance to the topic than some people do, because not all types of carbohydrates are equal when talking about insulin resistance. We have simple carbs, monosaccharides, those are sugars such as glucose or fructose, single sugars. We have disaccharides, which are lactose, which are comprised of 2 sugars. We also have long chain complex polysaccharides, which are, for instance, starches and other types of more than 10, 20, 30 different sugars connected to each other. We also have fiber, which is not even really being digested by our body and has been linked to so many positive effects on our health. It has been linked to protective effects for the development of colorectal cancer, so many positive things. And in the context of insulin resistance, specifically, soluble fiber could help people that suffer from insulin resistance better stabilize their blood sugar levels. Soluble fiber is contained in more sources of fiber more than other. Usually fiber sources contain both types of fiber, but of course there are some differences in the different foods. Unfortunately, until now, there is no universal strategy to manage insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes. One of the first things that shows up when you look online those types of strategies is having a diet that is lower in its glycemic index and lower in its glycemic loads. Here I want to put the focus on glycemic loads because the glycemic index is not the best way you can go about it. A glycemic index is a value that is calculated when the insulin response from 50 grams of carbs from a certain food is compared to the insulin response for 50 grams of glucose, just pure glucose solution. This value is between 0 and 100 compared to the glucose solution. The glucose solution would be 100 logically. The lower the value is, the lower the insulin response. The glycemic index is usually lower for foods that have more protein and more fats in them, so it depends on the matrix of the food. This is why different meats, different protein sources such as eggs, or again all types of meats and fish, do not have a high glycemic index. Legumes and beans also have a, let's say, good glycemic index, and other types of foods such as white bread, biscuits, highly processed desserts, they have a very high glycemic index because of the high insulin response and because they contain mostly simple sugars without that much fiber or protein to kind of compensate for the high amounts of free or added sugars. At the same time, the glycemic index for some specific foods does not give enough context, and this is why researchers also have the impression that following specifically a low glycemic index diet might not be the best strategy for people that want to manage their blood sugar levels. This is because the glycemic index does not take into account the portion sizes of a specific food. It only compares the insulin response of 50 grams of carbs of a food to 50 grams of carbs from pure glucose. And not all foods contain the same amount of carbohydrates. I'm pretty sure that this is nothing new to you. Here, one good example is watermelon, which has a very high glycemic index of above 70. However, watermelon does not have a lot of carbs per 100 grams. It is indeed mostly water, as the name suggests. This is why the glycemic load for watermelon would be just 4 for 100 grams compared to over 70 for the glycemic index. However, I couldn't really find any tables for the glycemic loads, unfortunately, so for people to really implement this type of diet, it would take a lot more education and it would be a lot more of a hassle, and you would probably need some nutritional coaching before that to be able to implement this correctly, or you would need to invest a lot of time to research on your own. Of course, the glycemic index is a good point to start from. However, people really need to take into account that some foods, especially very watery fruits and vegetables, do not contain that much carbs in general. There are other vegetables that are more rich in starch, such as potatoes or carrots. You can probably notice it, they're a lot more dense than other fruits and vegetables, and then they would actually probably have a higher glycemic load than the, let's say, tomato or watermelon. The glycemic load is also a strategy that has proven to be efficient in different bodies of research to help manage people's blood sugar levels. Some other strategies that one can implement here, they were directed towards diabetics, but I think it's useful to know them generally. Not having excessively large portions at night, especially up to, 2-3 hours before bedtime. I talked about this in my video on PCOS. It has been proven that having large amounts of foods closer to bedtime later on in the day would lead to a worse insulin response the next day, and it actually worsens conditions such as PCOS in terms of hormonal balance. In the same context, having your calories earlier in the day did help the women with PCOS improve their hormonal balance. Another thing is the implementation of more fiber, and specifically soluble fiber, especially at breakfast, to better manage the blood sugar levels throughout the entire day. This is again something that I believe is implementable for most people depending on the type of breakfast you have. The glucose goddess likes to talk about having only a savory type of breakfast to have your blood sugar levels normalized and stable throughout the day. I personally, as somebody that does not suffer from insulin resistance, have not noticed rapid drops of my energy a few hours after I have my breakfast. But of course, my breakfast is not exactly just simple sugar. It is not even instant oatmeal. I have my normal oats, normal oatmeal with some chia seeds, some peanut butter, and usually some yogurt and some type of fruit on the sides. This is a more complex matrix, especially the yogurt and the peanut butter 100% contribute to keeping me more satiated and having stable energy levels throughout the entire morning. And I do not like when people take this so largely out of context and make it out as to people not being able to consume their oatmeal anymore. Here I'm going to probably put a TikTok that I found, and she is obviously standing in front of the graph where you have oatmeal with peanut butter and the insulin response is better, and she's just pointing out the insulin response after oats with the fruit puree, which would be not as complex of a matrix with much less protein and fats compared to the second picture that she is consciously standing in front of. I really despise it when people do this, like just twisting something that you saw to fit your narrative. Anyways, moving on from that, another strategy to manage your insulin resistance generally would be having good amounts of muscle mass. That improves insulin resistance according to science compared to people who have less muscle mass. Generally, if you have a lot more muscle mass, you would have more glycogen storage, and you would also be able to store more sugars in your muscles, so your body can handle more sugar. It is a very logical thing once you think about it. So working out and building muscle could even help you in that sense. I talk about this every video to kind of drill it in your head that it is great for your long-term health, especially as age progresses. Now, to conclude the topic, let's talk about the World Health Organization and some controversy around sugar intake recommendations. According to the World Health Organization, the main recommendation is for people to consume less than 10% of their energy intake from free sugars. What are free sugars? Free sugars include both added sugars, which is just any type of substituted sugar to a highly processed dessert, or adding sugar to your coffee would also be technically added sugars. But in this category, also fruit juices, and honey falls. The further recommendation is to limit the intake down to 5% of your total energy intake. 10% of your total energy intake, let's say your energy intake is, 2,000 calories, then 10% of that would be 200 calories from both fruits, and sugar is present in other sources, and honey, and basically everything that falls into the category of free sugars. This might seem a bit extreme for some people, especially people that like to enjoy fruit a lot more. I'm not sure how much calories I consume in terms of those from fruits, but it might as well, even only from fruits, go above that mark, I suspect. And as you can see, it does not have any detrimental effects on my skin or on my energy levels, I believe, but yeah, that's just me, I guess. And I kind of share the opinion of this other research paper that I found, which challenges the recommendations by the World Health Organization as not being nuanced enough on the topic. This is because a diet that is very low in free sugars could also be somewhat less nutrient dense than diets that are a bit higher in free sugars. The same goes, of course, also for the opposite. Diets that are very rich in free sugars are also not very nutrient rich compared to other types of diets. Here, the main point that the researchers made in the end is like my basic opinion on this. The emphasis of the public health recommendation should be put on limiting or advising people to limit their intake of highly processed types of desserts that are sources of free sugars, and also sugar sweetened beverages. Here we're talking all types of donuts, biscuits, cakes, everything of the sort, and not generally advise people to limit all types of free sugars, and also include things like fruits and honey maybe in the recommendations. Mostly because things like fruits, in terms of the effect that they have on your health, do also have so many health benefits. There was this one research paper that I found. Here we take everything with a grain of salt because it was done on diabetic rats, so this is an animal study, but I think it's worth mentioning. They did a test on them with both sugar solutions, I think, or it was sweetened beverages, and also fruit juices as the source of sugar, let's say. And they found that the impact of the fruit juices was actually a lot better in terms of the insulin response and also the oxidative capacity compared to the other solutions. So you cannot say that both things are equal. And this would more apply to freshly squeezed fruit juices, even better if it's a fruit smoothie, because the fruit juices have the fiber taken away from them if you use a juicer, because all of the peels and the skin are gone. But if you have a smoothie, then everything would still be inside if you have not peeled, the apple, of course, prior to putting it into the smoothie blender. The main point was that for the oxidative capacity, fruits also contain a lot of antioxidants, polyphenols, and other things that can have a very good impact on our health. So this recommendation could really be twisted in a way for some people, again, not for everyone. Some people can really read through the lines, but that does not apply to everyone, unfortunately. Of course, excessive consumption of fruit juices is going to lead to an excessive sugar and fructose intake, but this applies if you're living like Freely the Banana Girl, or like, I don't know, early 2010s raw vegans that consumed also mainly fruit juices throughout the day. If you're a normal person that enjoys them as a snack or with the breakfast, I don't think that this applies to you. I hope that you got the point of the video. I think the entire topic around sugar fear mongering is a bit exaggerated. Thank you for being here with me today. I hope that you enjoyed the content of the video. If you liked it, do not forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Also, if you have a specific topic that you would like me to discuss, you can leave that in a comment down below. Thank you again very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.